Welcome to the Book Binge. I am your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today, for the 333rd episode of the Book Binge, which is an absolutely insane thing to be saying, we have a, sort of moderately special episode. You know, it's not, super special, but a fun concept that I wanted to do based on the fact that it is the 333 episode. So, thank you to one of my friends, Kamikaze, for the pitch that ultimately became this video's idea. Today, for the 333rd episode, we're going to talk about the title that is the subject. You know, we're going to talk about 3 standalone books that I'm most highly anticipating to read soon, trademark. 3 book series that I can't believe I haven't gotten around to reading yet, and then 3 authors whom I'm highly looking forward to checking out in general. For all intents and purposes, this is kind of a hybrid of a sort of TBR-esque type of video where these are books that I'm really excited to get to, most of them sooner than later, and also a sort of pile of shame of sorts as well. So, I hope that this video is as fun for you as it was for me to put together, we shall say. But let's jump right into it. Let's start off with the 3 standalone books that I'm excited to read hopefully pretty soon. The first one of these is a book that I actually probably should have already read by this point. That is Ivanhoe by Sir Walter Scott. Alongside the 3 Musketeers, I was technically supposed to read this book last year. You see, at the end of 2024, I said that there were 5 classics that I would read in 2025. 3 Musketeers was on that list. I finally got to that back in January of this year, and then Ivanhoe was also on that list, and I had that planned for the summer, but plans have changed a little bit, so I'm still waiting on this one. But Ivanhoe is a book that I've had kind of on my TBR, basically, that I've wanted to get to since 4th, 5th, 6th grade, basically. So for all intents and purposes, elementary and middle school, which is also something that I can say for Les Mis by Victor Hugo, which I finally read in 2022 as a book that I had been wanting to read since I was in 4th grade. So it's about time that I got to another one of these, and hopefully this happens pretty soon, because like I said, I was supposed to have read this one this summer, last month, maybe this month, and I haven't yet. The other 2 books that I am going to talk about, I also actually featured in that very same video, 5 classics that I would read in 2025, but these were both honorable mentions. One of those is Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy, and one of those is Notre Dame de Paris by Victor Hugo. So I've loved the other Tolstoy novels that I've read, and the concept for this third ultimate novel sounds potentially very rich. I think it definitely has the potential to be my favorite Tolstoy if things happen well enough. We'll see what happens with that. The other 2 were both 5-star reads, so I can't wait to give this one a shot when I have a chance for it. Like I said, this was one of the 2 honorable mentions. The other was Notre Dame de Paris by Victor Hugo. After considering Les Mis, one of my favorite books of all time, loving that book when I read it in 2022, I kind of have to read more Hugo. It's kind of obligatory at this point. Notre Dame de Paris, of course, the story that the Hunchback of Notre Dame is based on. It seems like the next place to go with Hugo, for sure. It is definitely one of my other highly anticipated classics. As far as classics go, these are the 3 that I'm most looking forward to reading. So for standalones, they definitely made the most sense to include for this list. Next up, let's talk about the 3 series that I can't believe that I haven't read yet at this point, this being essentially the most pile of shame worthy section of this video. The first series worth mentioning is one that I technically started in 6th grade, read the first book and part of the second. That is Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. However, I was not allowed to continue the series at that time. My mom was one of those moms at the time, and I just never got back around to it when I had to stop in the middle of book 2. So of all the formative YA book series out there, it's kind of crazy that this is one that I just haven't read in full yet, but one that I definitely intend to get back around to for, the reasons of the zeitgeist, so that I can actually know and understand Harry Potter as this cultural phenomenon, all things considered, and also because I'm genuinely just curious to see what the series is all about once you get to the later parts of it, because I did like the first book and I was enjoying the second book. I just got in trouble and wasn't allowed to finish it. So Harry Potter is maybe the top thing on my pile of shame at this point, as far as books that it's crazy that I haven't read, especially for my age group. I remember kids in my grade growing up, like reading these books and finishing the series just in like fourth and fifth grade as like being the series that they read. Meanwhile, in fifth and sixth grade, it was like Rick Riordan was my formative YA author as opposed to Harry Potter. So again, I definitely need to get back around to this and figure out what it is I'm actually missing with the series. The next series that is on my pile of shame here is on my pile of shame basically because a bunch of my friends read the series way back in 2022, and I've had FOMO ever since then and just always forget to prioritize it for reasons that I don't even know to determine, right? So this is the Lonesome Dove Saga by Larry McMurtry. So I have them set out here. I will set them out in the chronological order of the series, which is the order that I plan to read the series. Of course, don't mind that the fourth book is a different edition. It is what it is. I really, really, really want to get to this series. Like every time I see these on my shelf, I feel bad that I haven't circled back around to them yet. Will that change anything about my timing to read them in the future? Probably not, but one can dream. This is definitely one that I want to get to. When I'm in a Western mood again, I think I'm finally going to pick up this series, because like last year I read a couple of Western books, a few Western books even, and enjoyed them all. And so I definitely need to get more into that with Lonesome Dove for sure. The last series on this list, anyway, for the purposes of the pile of shame here, is more so pile of shame just because I kind of intended to read or start the series like 2-3 years ago at this point, and I just haven't yet. That is The Bound and the Broken by Ryan Cahill. Holy cow, these things are heavy. Oh, jeez. I don't know what paper they make these out of, but it is some thick, heavy paper, that is for sure. Anyway, as far as epic fantasy goes, this is definitely a series that I'm really, really looking forward to getting to. It's one of my more anticipated series out there. The fact that I haven't had time to get to it yet in the past few years makes me pretty sad in some ways, but with the last book coming out here in a couple of years, the final novella coming out here in just a few months, I think it will be time to finally get to The Bound and the Broken very soon, probably next year, honestly. I'm not going to make any guaranteed promises on that, but I definitely want to get to this and be on the bandwagon for the last book's release. That is a plan that I have for sure. And now for a few authors whose broader catalog are things that I'm really looking forward to reading. There are a couple of exceptions with a couple of these entries, but we'll get to that here in just a second, I guess. The first one of these authors that I'm going to talk about is Brandon Sanderson. Of course, it seemed a little bit of overkill to grab every one of his books that I have on those couple of shelves back there, so I just grabbed a few notable ones, Start of Mistborn, Start of Stormlight, Warbreaker, one of the secret projects, of course, to kind of cover the broader gaps of the Cosmere, which is technically speaking, more of what I'm interested with reading with Brando. I'm not as interested in the non-Cosmere stuff, so for now, we'll just say I'm very interested in getting to the Cosmere, and also there is a caveat to this entry here, because I have, of course, read Sanderson's Wheel of Time entries, because I recently finished reading The Wheel of Time. But I did say that I wasn't going to read any of the Cosmere or any of Sanderson's solo work until after I was done with The Wheel of Time, so that means that sooner than later, I do plan to actually get to the Cosmere and some of this stuff. Not entirely sure when that'll be, or how quick it'll be getting through all that stuff, given that it's different sub-series and whatnot within there. It's definitely something that can take a little bit more time, that I'll probably not feel as stressed about the way that I did with Wheel of Time, but for all intents and purposes, I do plan to get to Sando sooner than later. Really excited to. Probably I'll get to Elantris in 2027 if I were to guess. So Sanderson's definitely one of those authors to read. Another one of those authors is somebody completely different, and that is Haruki Murakami, showing off the books that I have already owned for a while of his here. I just read my first Murakami book earlier this year. It was Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World, that I read back in January, and as a result, I plan to read all of his books. Now, that's not because I expect all the books to be like Hard-Boiled Wonderland. I've been assured that that isn't the case. But I am still very curious about the broader bulk of his catalog, and so I've recently decided to go about trying to collect the rest of his books, as many in this, cover style as possible, just for, matching sake, because I like the way they look. But Murakami is an author that I'm very excited to read more of. And once again, hopefully a little bit sooner than later. Probably Murakami will join the ranks alongside like Stephen King and Michael Crichton as like these standalone authors that I just kind of pull from for, if I have time, or for palate cleansers or something like that every once in a while, just for something a little bit different, generally a little bit shorter most of the time. So that is something that I'm definitely looking forward to. And once again, something very different for the third author on this list. You can see his name poking out there already, Thomas Pynchon. These are all of the books of his that I own so far, but I do basically plan to read all of his books for some reason. For the same reason that I read all of McCarthy, for whatever reason, even though that probably wasn't the wisest decision, I plan to read all of Pynchon, even though that, once again, probably isn't the wisest decision. Now, a couple of years ago, in early 2024, I did already read The Crying of Lot 49. I do plan to reread this, because at some point here, I plan to go through all of Pynchon's work, probably in publication order. That means reading Crying of Lot 49 again early on in that journey. And I'm honestly more excited for this than I should be, even though I'm still very scared by Gravity's Rainbow. And maybe a couple other books in his bibliography, but considering he only has, somewhere approximately around 12 books, well, it's not even that many, is it? Especially if you include the short story collection. I don't remember how many books it is, but it's enough books that even I could manage to read all of his books in a year if I just made Pynchon the thing that I organized my TBR around. I did for a little while have a joke going on with some of my friends that I would read all of Pynchon's books in 2027, doing a great Pynchon read along. Partway through this year, however, I kind of decided that for my own sanity, I'm not going to do that, but maybe I still will, just in a year that isn't 2027. I have other things that I have to get through next year, or that I want to get through, that will more or less inherently necessitate that I don't actually read Thomas Pynchon in 2027. So, those are the three authors, Sanderson, Murakami, and Pynchon, for a pretty big variety as far as the author topic goes. But now, before we actually close this video, I do want to go over a few honorable mentions in each category. And by a few, I mean there's one honorable mention for the standalones, for the series, and for the authors that I decided not to include for technicality reasons in one sense or another, or at least technicalities more so than the topics themselves already garnered. But it doesn't really matter. The point is, for a standalone, the honorable mention here is going to be In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust. Of course, the reason why I didn't ultimately include this here is because I'm not planning on reading this sooner than later. I do in fact want to give myself a little bit more time before I tackle this, maybe another decade or so. Maybe not quite that long, but you never know. I do want to give myself a little bit more time before I actually tackle reading some Proust. And also the fact that despite this being technically one book, it is also 7 volumes. So including this in the standalone section would feel a little bit more like cheating than I wanted to do. So there's that. Within the series section, again, for a very similar technicality reason, I wanted to include Star Wars Legends, basically, but because Legends is made up of, dozens of series and standalone books, including Legends as a broader universe thing would not really work or make sense for this type of video, so I didn't include it in the list proper, but I do want to read a lot more Star Wars stuff, so, definitely a more broad cheating topic. I'm just holding up the, what is it called? The Thrawn trilogy, that's the word. So I am holding these up as kind of the example, but I do plan and want to read the majority of the Legends content out there, if not all of it. So, that's something else to mention there. And as far as individual authors, I also wanted to include Tolkien on the list. Now, there's, again, 2 reasons why I did not include Tolkien on the authors list. Number 1 being that I've already read The Hobbit a few times. I've read The Lord of the Rings. I'm going to be rereading The Lord of the Rings this year. I've read The Silmarillion. Plan to reread The Silmarillion at some point after I get through Lord of the Rings as well, just to get myself more into that world, but also because, the vast majority of the other Tolkien stuff that has come out was posthumous releases, of course, and also because the vast majority of that stuff is also the history of Middle Earth, so it's kind of a different type of thing compared to reading, the author's properly published output, if that makes any sense. I do want to read more Tolkien, but I did not include him on the list because I have read a lot of his stuff, and also because the sort of technicality with which a lot of it exists is being edited by other people Christopher Tolkien primarily, and not solely his complete finished work, right? So like there's just something a little bit different about that. So those are the honorable mentions. And that also brings us to the end of this video. I hope you had fun with it. I definitely had fun coming up with the various lists here. This video is a little bit shorter than I expected it to be, but I am curious to hear from you guys. You know, what are some books, series, and authors that you really want to read? What are some things that are on your pile of shame that you've been meaning to get to for years or maybe even longer and just somehow haven't yet? Let me know all that in the comments below. I would certainly be interested to hear. But for now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.